The Defense Department's current budget system plans funding for 5 years out. Now the Senate Armed Services Committee wants to reform DoD's planning, programming, budget, and execution, or PPBE process. Eric Lofgren is a senior fellow at the Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University. Eric, welcome to the program.
You're welcome.
DoD still uses management systems that were designed in the industrial era. This is over 50 years ago. What was this PPBE created to do, and how's it working now?
Right. Yeah, the PPBE, or the PPB system at the time, was really a revolutionary and radical kind of idea. And one of the things that it was trying to do was actually reduce duplication and overlap. So you might have multiple systems like, an aircraft carrier and a long-range bomber, which was one of the issues in the late 40s. And there might not be enough resources, but the budget doesn't have the ability to control what the services were actually doing. So the primary concept of the PPBE is to create the programming system, where a budget line item actually looks like something like a specific weapon system, an F-16, a Stryker combat vehicle, for example. And while this seems natural enough, it's actually a sharp break from traditional budgeting practices, as well as the practices that now exist in the commercial sector and the international governments as well. And the reason is because this programming system requires a great deal of prediction and consensus, actually, about future technologies and concepts of operations. And these predictions are not only prone to error, they create these very long decision lead times and lock-in effects. So the average age of a major development or procurement program is actually over 14 years old today. That was like before Amazon, or right when Amazon AWS in the cloud was really coming out. So you can get an idea of when the requirements and technologies were really being formulated for these defense
Eric,
programs.
tell me a little bit more about how this is limiting DoD operations. Obviously, as you said, we didn't have high tech back when this thing was created. So how is this a problem for defense acquisition?
Yeah, of course, not only does it create a long lead time, like it takes 3 years to get something new into the budget or to cancel or ramp up or ramp down, because once that budget goes, you're kind of locked into those program stovepipes. And to give you an idea, the median, like more than 50% of Army research and development programs are less than $24 million in the FY22 budget. And so they have to predict that 3 years out, and then they have limited opportunity to be able to actually reallocate that. And so it creates this kind of lock-in effect as well, and the long decision lead times again. But the real problem here is that in the past, the Department of Defense was kind of leading or doing this requirements pull on technology, whereas today, commercial technology is actually, in some cases, leading the way, and the DoD needs to be able to have an opportunistic approach to be able to pull in these commercial technologies in a more rapid and actually commercially viable way, so that the DoD is able to take advantage of all the great things happening in the commercial sector and make them dual use.
Eric, what is the Valley of Death? Because it sounds very ominous.
So the Valley of Death, of course, is that time of transition between like a science and technology, or kind of like a startup idea, into what we call a program of record. And of course, there was no such thing as a program of record prior to the PPBE process, right? In the 1950s, there was no such thing. You had these portfolio budgets where, leaders with discretion were actually able to make opportunity cost trade-offs within the year of execution, whereas today, you would have to actually predict what the prototype was going to do and what it would enable you to do, before it was done, so that you had the money 3 years lined up ahead of time to transition it. So that gap of when the prototype happens and when the money is available is called the Valley of Death. And of course, the DoD prototyping guide from 2019 targets actually the PPBE as a primary cause of this Valley of Death, or the lack of scaling of new technologies into major defense programs.
What about Congress? What have the recent discussions been there for reforming this whole process?
Yeah, so there's actually been a flurry of interest in this in Congress. So Jack Reed, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Adam Smith as well, the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, have been looking at this and talking about it openly. The Senate has, in their report on the draft NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act for 22, actually recommended having a commission, a major commission on PBBE reform to look at this and really, for the first time since the 60s, take a real hard look at the resourcing and requirement system and as well as oversight. Whereas the House Armed Services Committee, their report did not include that same commission. It was slightly scoped down to specifically look at the Valley of Death issue and was looking for a report from the Secretary of Defense on how to scale that. But of course, the Valley of Death issue is really a symptom of a broader governance struggle in the PBBE.
All right, very good, Eric. Thanks so much for being on the program.
You're welcome.